Welcome to the fastest stop in town. Today we're going to start the Sukkah Daf Ches. We are going to begin on the bottom of Zayin Beis, about 7 lines from the bottom. I'm Rabbi Yochanan. So Rabbi Yochanan says an interesting statement of a Sukkah Hasuya Kikivsha, a Sukkah which is made like an oven, which, as you can see, is a circle, as the Gemara puts a picture of it right there. So Imesh Ba'Kefa. He says, interestingly enough, if you can put around the entire circumference enough to be able to put 24 people all around the circle, that means that is big enough for a sukkah. However, if it's so small that you cannot fit 24 people all around the entire circumference of that circle, it's too small. Now the question is, who is this like? Come on. Must be Karebi. We're going to assume out of the three opinions between Beis Shammai and Beis Hillel, this probably is going to be like the opinion of Rabbi, who is the largest measurement in order to be a large kosher sukkah. So the question is, how do we figure out a circular sukkah that it's 24 based on what we would understand as a square sukkah of Dalet al Dalet? So let's see. Gavra ba'amsi Yosef. A person, their body, again, is about 18 inches. They sit and take up an am of space. So if every person is shoulder to shoulder all around a circle, so the question is, how big now is the circumference? So therefore the circumference all around is 24 amos. And we have a principle of pi. Kol sheyesh b'hakefa shloish tvachim. Anytime you have 3 as a circumference, yesh boy roichav tefach. So the diameter from one side to the next is going to be a tefach, which again we know this is really not exact. Tosfos says because we know pi is 3.14, as we learn interestingly enough in the Masechtas Eruvin, which is the third Masechta, Brachos Shabbos Eruvin, on Daf Yud Daled, 3.14. So even though that's the truth, but nonetheless we're being somewhat rounding off to the nearest whole number. So the question is, if that's the case, then Treyas or Sagi, then really 12 should be enough. You should only need to have 12, because if you think about it, if from one side to the next is 4, so then the circumference, using the 1 to 3 ratio, 4, so around would be 12. So the question is, why then would we need 24 people around? Well, you only need 12, as we continue to Ches Manal. Sumer says, but interestingly enough, this Gemara pi, which has to do with eating, is on Daf Ches, which is 8, way of eating. Also interestingly to note that the Gemara pi and these types of measurements of, we're going to see Pythagorean theorem, is also found in Masechtas Shabbos, also on Daf Ches Amud Aleph, the same Amud as here, Daf 8. When you think about pi, you eat pie. Okay, that's how I remember it. Hani mili be'egula. The question is it really 12 around? That's only if we're dealing with a circle. However, abel b'ribua boitfei. If we're talking about a square, because we're trying to square it out, it's got to be more than 12 people. So 12 is not enough. The question is, how do we get to 24? So michti, let's see. How much more is a square than a circle? Revia, a quarter more. So if that's the case, b'shitzer sagi, then you should only need 16. Now, why exactly do we get to 16? So again, if you think about it, if we have a circle, okay, which is from one side to the next is 4, right? So therefore, if you imagine and you would put that up above the circle, so then it would end up being 4, 4, 4, 4. So it would end up having 16. Whereas this picture that I'm pointing to demonstrates that if in fact, again, based on pi, which is a 3-to-1 ratio, so if one side to the next is 4, because you're saying 4 by 4 almost, so therefore the truth is you only need 16. This side is 4, so then it should be 4, 4, 4, 4, which again would be would be 16. So where it says that's true, that's only where you have a circle and then you have the square which is on the outside of it. However, Abel ribua de nafik migoy gula boitve mishum morsha de karnasa. However, what we're going to be looking at is imagine you put a square inside the circle, and because of the corners, so it's going to end up being larger. So michti, kol masa. So you actually can see that again. The first picture on this Gemara, we're assuming that you put the square outside of the circle, and therefore ends up being 16. Again, because the diameter, if it's 3 around, and even if it would be 12 people around the circle, so that would equal 4, because it's going to be 4 by 4, so it ends up being only 16. But we're saying actually you have to put the square inside the circle. So now we have a squared plus b squared equals c squared. So it says like this: Kol amasa b'ribua amasa b'trei chumsha. Anytime you have an amma and 2/5, and there's 1.4 bi'al kasuna and it's diagonal. So if you would look at a square, but instead of just looking at it this way, you're looking at it from one side to the next at a diagonal. So then, and that's the case, really 17 minus a fifth should be enough, 16.8. Why? Because again, we're saying that it's one, if it's, let's say, every time you have a square, which is 1 by 1 on length and width, the diagonal will end up being 1.4. So we're saying that we want it to be 4 by 4, like Rabbi, so therefore it's 4, so therefore 4 times 1.4 is 5.6. So therefore, touching from one side of the corner of the square to the other, it therefore, which also would end up being the diameter of a circle, ends up being 5.6. Then you would multiply that based on pi to measure the circumference, which would be 5.6 times 3, which would be 16.8, not 24. Where it says, okay, well, doc, we're not exact. It's close enough. So, porta. It's not a small amount. So how can you say doc? Doc is when it's a small difference. This is a huge difference. 24, it's not 20, it's really 16.8. Doc. You can't say doc between 16.8 and 24. So, Amalei Markashisha Beredu Rav Chisda, Ravashi, no. There's one assumption that we made which is incorrect. Mi sabred gabra ba'amsa yasiv. We assume that every person is sitting in one amma, and therefore the circle is 24. The truth is, tlasa gabri b'tarti amasiyasi. People aren't that big. 3 people sit in the space of 2 amos. 3 people sit in 2 amos. So therefore what? Instead of looking at 24 shoulder to shoulder, now it's 2/3 of that, which is 16. Okay? So kama havilu shitzer, it's 16. Anan shivtzu nechi chum shabi'inan. The truth is you need 16.8, as we calculated. As we said, 4 by 4, so the diagonal is 5.6 times 3 is 16.8. Okay, well, doc. So really, it's supposed to be 16.8. Less than 16.8 isn't any good. We tell 16. So, well, doc. Well, 1 second. How can you say doc over here? Because if you say doc, so people are going to say, okay, 16 is exactly the amount. But that's not the correct amount. The correct amount must be at least 16.8. So we're not going to be, if we're not going to be exact, we'll say something which will be more than the required, the minimum dimensions, not less than it. So okay, you're right originally. A person sits in an am. However, this is the distinction. Rabbi Yochanan makam gabri lo kachashin. He doesn't include the people who are inside. In other words, he's only including when you look around the 24 amos. If you look at the circle, he's not talking about the outside of each person, rather inside. And therefore, the first person on one side and the opposite direction, which is an am and an amma, is deducted. So instead of it being 24, and therefore the diameter is 8, no. It's really, we're looking at as the diameter 6. And therefore, it's 18 around. And therefore, because of that, as the Gemara says, 18 is a good number. Amalei Ravasi Om Gabra Babsi Yosef. Yav Yochanan Mokum Gabra Kachoshev. So Kamlahu, so Tam Nitzari. So it's 18, 6 times 3. So 1 second, 18, that's not the right number. We know it's really, as we calculate B'Shivs and Nechichum Shesagid, you really only need 17 minus a fifth, which is 16.8. Okay, so again, because if it's 4 by 4, the diagonal is 5.6 times 3, because the pi, the circumference is 16.8. So how can you telling me, oh, you need 18? No, you can go strict over here, tell people 18, the truth is it's only 16.8, and therefore you're okay. As we said before, when you have a circle in which outside of the circle is a square, that square takes them an extra quarter, and that we calculated, because as we said, the circumference, imagine, is 1, right? So if the circle is inside the square, so from one side of the circle to the other is 1, that means the circumference is 3. And when it comes to a square, if it's 1 in this direction, that's the same amount of space once you move up the square to the square on the outside, so it becomes 1, 1, 1, 1. So therefore, instead of it being the circle, which is 3, the square is 4, which is an outside fourth. You can also say it's a third, but it's a little roy. The outside, the inside is how the Gemara usually interprets. As we continue to Chesed Beis, this next statement is a little bit difficult. Ribua de nafik migoigua palga. It says that once you put a square inside that circle, so that circle, because of all the corners, there's so much space all around the corners, it's actually, the square is half the size. Velohi, we know that's not the case. We know the circle is not that much bigger, because that's how we calculated it. If you go back, what do we say? We said that the circle, if you have the square inside, and it's touching, it's 1 by 1, the square, the diagonal is 1.4. So it's 1.4, so that means this, if you would then envision, again, the square is 4, 1 on all sides, and then we said that the circle outside is 5.6. It's certainly not half, right? You're right, a circle outside a square is obviously bigger because it's outside of the square, but the circle is only 5.6, the square is 4. So to say that it's half certainly is not the case. Okay. Omer Viter New Gemara. Omer Rav Levi Mishem Rav Meir. Shtei Sukkos Shel Yotzrim. There was 2 sukkahs which were made from Yotzrim, these workers. Let's see if I have any pictures of this. There's a lot of pictures on the Gemara just said. So we're going to be analyzing this picture right here. So you have these 2 sukkahs of these workers, Zulef Nimazu. One's inside the other one. Now Panimis, the inner one, ain't a sukkah. It's not considered a sukkah, but chayav is mezuzah. And it's chayav and mezuzah. It's like more of a diras keva. However, Rachitzayin, the outer one, is a sukkah, which is more temporary. So it says as a bed in the inner one, the outer one is like where he does work. Upaturman and mezuzah. But why do we say this? Dahavi chitzayin kabei shar panimis. Why don't we at least say the outer one to the main living quarters is at least considered to be like a shar panimis, an inner gate. And it's chayav b'mezuzah. We should at least say it's chayav b'mezuzah, the outer one. The Marian says mishum do kivia. Since the inner room is not keva enough to warrant on the outside an entrance hall. So the inner one is also, it's really for storage and all these things. There's a bed there, so people do sleep there, but it's not considered like a normal dwelling place. So it's enough that you're mechuyev mezuzah in that one, but it's not enough to be mechuyev mezuzah in the outside one. Tanurba, ganvach. What is ganvach? Sukkahs goyim, sukkahs noshim, sukkahs behema, sukkahs kusim. You have a sukkah that was made by all these different people, either someone who's not Jewish, women, an animal, like a beaver, or some type of animal, or a sukkah of a kuti. So all these different people, if they make a sukkah mikol makom ksheira. In all circumstances, it's a good sukkah. Obviously, they have to put it on properly. It has to be done for the sake of schach, for sale. So my kihilchas, so what does it mean? So Amar Chisda who shasel it sales. I said it has to be done for the sake of shape. Okay. Fine. So it says in all circumstances, it must be coming to include something beyond just these four. What's the sukkah's rakvash? So the Gemara says this. Tanaba. Sukkah's rakvash, sukkah's urayim, the sukkah of shepherds. Sukkah's kaitzim, again the sukkah of people who are engaged in various forms of hunting. Rashi says kaitzim shaimer kitziyos, rather. They're guarding figs in the field. They're watching them dry. Sukkah's borganin, which we said before regarding eruvi tchumim, that you can make an ibur ben shtei yiros. So Rashi says that's a shemer ear, like a policeman, a guard. Kulin Yisraelim hand. They're all Jews that did it. Sukkah zu lo l'shem chag nasa. So it wasn't done for the sake of a holiday. Sukkah's shemer peres sukkah mikol makom kshera. Well, that's name is Succah's kilchus amay hilchasa. Shamal chisda v'hu sheyasel l'tzel sukkah. That's to be done for the shade. Kol makom usui mai. So Yisui sukkah's ganvach, which is interesting. On one hand, it seems like ganvach is more strict, more of a reason maybe to say it doesn't work. And some you would think by rakvash. So what does one have that the other one is lacking? So hai tana de ganvach, alima le ganvach mishum de kivi. At least when it comes to these other sukkahs, they were more of a permanent structure. Because tani mikol makom is rakvash to kivi. These are sukkahs that are just like thrown for one day and put down and dismantled. So maybe you would think that's nothing. It's not in the sukkah. The hai tana de rakvash. At least the people that are in those dwelling places are Jewish men who are mechuyev to do the mitzvah sukkah. So maybe only there do we say it works. And therefore, to include all those people who also are not mechuyev, like goyim, noshim, behema, kusim. Okay, let's stop here. Let's see a couple of questions. So, first of all, there's only one question over here, question 6. My mahigir yuta the sukkahs ganvach masukkahs rakvash, mahigir yuta the sukkahs rakvash masukkahs ganvach. Again, ganvach, sukkahs ganvach, right? They at least are kaviyeh. However, rakvash is not keva. But at least rakvash is b'nei chiyuva. Okay. TA 17. Alman nemar migu dehavi daifon l'sukkah. I already did this. I'm not sure why I didn't do this. Alman nemar migu dehavi daifon l'shabbos. So when it came to on yesterday's daf, I'll just review this quickly. That when it came to a sukkah with rather on Shabbos. If you had a mavoy with a lechi, so it works for Shabbos, or pasibiros, so also if you put skaf on there, it'll be good as well. Since it works for Shabbos, it works for Sukkot, even though it's from Chumrah to Kula. Kula to Chumrah, when it came to Shtaim Hilchos and Shlishis Vil Tefa, so we said that din applies as well when it comes to Shabbos. Even though it just works for Sukkah, it will also work Migu also on Shabbos and Sukkot. That was TA 17. I skipped over that. It was actually a similar question which we had in yesterday's TB 18. Okay, let's see if there's another question. Ma chidish Sukkos ganvach, ma chidish Sukkos rakvash. Okay, I'm not going to review that. That's the exact same question as question 6. This was TA 18. Interesting, they don't want to deal with this whole Gemara of a circle. Let's see question 19, TB 19. Ma milyosa sukkos ganvach, la sukkos rakvash, ma milyosa to rakvash ganvach. So again, once again, they skipped over all the different tests. They didn't want to deal with the Amud about the circle Gemara. Too bad. Maybe we'll see this next test. Ad kan.